On July 20th, 1831, the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith Jr. received a revelation after traveling from the Latter-day Saints headquarters in Kirtland, Ohio, to Independence, Missouri, and communicated it to his Mormon followers. "If ye faithful, ye shall assemble yourselves together and rejoice upon the land of Missouri, which is the land of your inheritance, which is now the land of your enemies." God had revealed to Joseph Smith while visiting Independence that the Garden of Eden was located in Jackson County, Missouri, and that this land would be a new Zion for the Mormon people, a promised land for them. Now, having a promised land was very important to the Mormons because anywhere they chose to live among others, from their perspective, they were living in a cesspool of sin, gambling, people not worshiping correctly, and drinking. It was terrible, especially considering these were the only pastimes available for people back in 1830. Mormons were like a culture of people that sprung up from the Puritans that thought the Puritans were not Puritan enough. Mormons wanted their own society, where their children could play and be little Mormons without running into drunks in the street, while waiting for the literal end of the world, which most believed would happen in their lifetime. Also, an important thing to know about the Mormons is when Joseph Smith says to do something, they do it. Mormons today are pretty community-centered and industrious, but in the 1830s, they were clandestine. When they decided to move, they all moved. And when word got around that Joseph Smith had found their promised land, where they would build their perfect Mormon society, with convenient adjacent parking to the promised location when Jesus would return, they got to relocating. Now, in Jackson County was the young town of Independence. Settled in the early 19th century, the town was only about 15 years old and would commonly be known later as the start of the Oregon Trail. But for now, it would be the end of the Mormon Trail, as the town was very convenient for them being in their promised land. After all, every promised land should have a town, and it saved the Mormons the trouble of building one of their own, which, as we will learn, they are more than willing to do. And thus began the problem. You see, for many reasons, some true and some we will learn here were just ignorance and propaganda, the people of Jackson County in 1831 were not exactly thrilled for this influx of thousands of Easterners into their territory. For one, they were just different, which was an issue in 1831 for anybody. The Mormons spoke not just with a different accent in those days, Easterners spoke with a whole different dialect of English. I mean, they could certainly understand one another, but it would be clear to the Missourians you were not from there. Also, Missouri was a slave state, and this was only 30 years before the American Civil War, when the issue was very contentious in the U.S. Senate, to say the least. Missourians were pretty touchy about thousands of people moving into their counties from the Northeast who all voted as a solid bloc, and many of them were opposed to slavery, which created the misnomer that Mormons were anti-slavery at the time, which was absolutely not true as a tenet of Mormonism. It just had more to do with where they came from. In 1836, Joseph Smith wrote Messenger and Advocate, which was a pro-slavery pamphlet. But just where these people were from, and that some of them had anti-slavery views, was enough to paint them as abolitionists. You can think of it like people from California moving to a red state today. They're not exactly welcome. But amplify that times about 1,000. In addition to that, the Mormons showed up with money, and as we will learn in later chapters, tended to print their own money. They also kind of tended to financially support other Mormon businesses and families. And this was a problem for the already established businesses in town at the time, as none of the new settlers were frequenting their businesses, but they were opening up competition and taking their customers. And where did that money filter back to? The church. Joseph Smith also taught that the Native Americans should be converted and would inherit the land of Missouri someday as it was rightfully theirs. And the settlers and Native Americans weren't exactly on good terms at the time. Some of these people had killed them for this land. And this was a time when Native American reprisals were a thing, and a lot of them were due to the white man trying to convert them to Christianity. Now here's where the social conundrum comes in. The Mormons had every right to purchase land, open up businesses, and start a church wherever they want. They were U.S. citizens, and this was an American state. They were entitled to all of the rights everyone else should be able to enjoy, including their right to association and religious freedom. They were doing nothing technically or legally wrong here. But the problem is, this is a southern state in 1831. Your rights were not really being enforced by the federal government in that place and time just yet. And the Mormons just moved into a community that was politically opposed to them in numbers that rivaled the established voter base. With their strange, clandestine, cultish religion these people had never heard of. They declared the native Missourians home their promised land. They started setting up their own banks and businesses, and within a few years became just as successful as the townspeople who had lived there for generations. Also, there's something to be said for how insulted people in that time got when they were looked at as sinners. I don't think even the Mormons would disagree. They were probably a little hoity-toity. Remember, the saints don't even drink coffee. So that means no alcohol, no tobacco, no catting around with whores, no frontier fun. Even if you were a pretty vanilla person for the times, the Mormons considered you an egregious sinner. And that knowledge can lead to a very "you think you're better than me" mentality among the people who already lived there. But again, I want to be clear, the Mormons were doing nothing wrong. They should have been allowed to settle and move wherever they wanted. But I think we can see some obvious reasons why this relationship between the Mormons and Missouri turned sour, to say the least. And I know we all like to think of Mormons as the nicest people on earth, but remember the last line of the revelation that brought them there, which is the land of your inheritance, which is now the land of your enemies. It's safe to say, Mormons at the time weren't too eager to get out in the community and make friends with everyone. So this went on for 3 years. Neighbors kind of hating one another, arguing in the streets. There were some fights, a few attacks on Mormons, kicking each other's trash cans over. It wasn't pleasant, but nothing too major happened. That is until 1833. The town had become a powder keg of aggression, and the non-Mormon Independence residents decided to have a little meeting. At this meeting, approximately 450 non-Mormons met at the courthouse, where they decided on some new rules to address this little Mormon problem they were having. Rule number 1, no more Mormons can move to Independence. Rule number 2, any Mormon families who had settled there must leave. They figured this was a better option than forming a violent mob and threatening the Mormon families directly, which the Missourians apparently put in their back pocket for later. So now that they had their demands for the Mormons, they marched right down to the local Mormon printing office and press in Independence. To tell the saints they had to be out by April. When they arrived, they met Bishop Edward Partridge and delivered their demands. Hello, neighbor. May the love and light of Jesus Christ and Elohim shine upon you. Edward Partridge, the people of Independence have declared that you and your disgusting church of kinda anti-slavery pro-Indian people that follow a weird living prophet need to get out of our town. Soon! The other option is we declare total war on you and your Mormon brothers. That is illegal and un-American. But since you brought a violent mob, I'll see what I can do. Of course, I'll have to meet with the church leaders before I can give you an answer. You have 15 minutes. 15? You can't possibly... This is 1833. I can't get to the first farm and tell one person in 15 minutes, much less meet with all the church leaders and get you an answer. I'm in no position to accept your demands or not. This is a printing press. I see. So you have chosen total war then? War? No! Just your demands are impossible to meet. Almost as if they were tailored to create exactly this scenario. War it is, filthy Mormon. You did this to yourselves. By the way, that was historically accurate. They went to this guy and said, you have 15 minutes. No telephones, no internet, no motor cars, not a single luxury. They were like, you better just jog yourself from farm to farm to hundreds of people's homes and tell them to get out in 15 minutes, or else we're gonna do what we planned to do when we got here anyway. And so the people of Independence, Missouri looted and burned the printing office. No more Mormon newspapers. No more Books of Mormon for Independence. And then for a good measure, they tarred and feathered Edward Partridge and sacked a few more Mormon businesses. Now after this, the Mormons knew they had to watch their backs around Independence. They were on notice. There were some more incidents, but nothing like the mob that met at the courthouse. That is, until July 23rd, 1833, when another mob of unknown origin this time was formed. And this mob meant business. The Mormons were being optimistic, as we will learn they typically are, and they were acting like they could see this through, like it would just blow over. So a new threat was issued, as was reported in the news at the time. If the Mormons will not go without, we will whip and kill the men. We will destroy the lives of their children and ravish their women. It is at this point I would like to point out that we are in America right now. These people are neighbors, talking about destroying their neighbors' children's lives and raping the women of the community. So this rape mob proceeded to do exactly what they promised, ransacking and burning Mormon homes in the area. So what did the Mormons do? Well, first, 6 Mormon leaders offered themselves as sacrifices to the townspeople if they agreed to leave the other Mormon families alone. A blood atonement sacrifice, which might have worked if the mob was just interested in subjugating and torturing their enemies, making an example out of people. But they weren't. They were there for the purpose of expulsion of all of their political and business enemies, and 6 Mormon lives in exchange for the safety and security of thousands of other Mormon families for all time just wasn't a fair exchange to the Missouri residents. And hey, Mormons aren't stupid. Frankly, I'm pretty positive the Mormons knew this offer would be refused. I think the 6 church leaders just wanted to look really awesome and selfless in front of the people they were about to have to ask to help them move. And move they did. The Mormons signed an agreement to be out of Jackson County by April 1st, 1834. That's right. In Missouri at the time, you could straight up arbitrate an entire community to sign an expulsion order under penalty of death and rape. Legally, in writing, and enforce it. Oh, and the Mormons were also warned that if they ever tried to revisit this issue or re-arbitrate it in any way or try to back out, the rape and burn initiative was back on. But despite that threat, after signing under what I think can be reasonably described as extreme duress, the Mormons appealed to the governor at the time, Daniel Dunklin. Governor Dunklin replied that this was a problem for the local government. The local government that just had a meeting at the courthouse to straight up rape and pillage the Mormon homes and settlements in the area if they didn't leave. And I mean that literally. Town constables, county court judges, county clerks, and 2 justices of the peace were confirmed and identified members of the mob. So the Mormons decided to get while the getting was good and leave Independence, as they were being illegally terrorized and there was no one in sight and no help coming. So where did they go? They went to Ray and Clay counties, Missouri, right across the river from Independence in Jackson County, which was very Mormon of them, admittedly. It was certainly a bit of a middle finger to stay so close while technically keeping their end of the bargain, but what could you say to them? And plus, they just lost all their homes. They were living in tents. So the people of Jackson County just kind of let them be across the river. Oh, by the way, did you say Ray County? Yes, that exact same Ray County. Fun fact. So when kicked out of Jackson County, the Mormons moved right next door across the river, but they remained scattered, living in these camps. Some attempted to settle the lands and move to the smaller towns, but for the most part, the Mormons, who were a very close-knit and clandestine community, had their society shattered by the expulsion from Independence. Word reached Joseph Smith in Kirtland, Ohio, the church headquarters, what had happened to the saints, and in response, he prayed on it. And luckily, as keeps happening with him, he received a revelation that he should put together a party to go help those lost saints in Missouri. The expedition was called Zion's Camp. We'll go into the story of Zion's Camp more in our future videos on Joseph Smith's life. And it's a pretty important story to tell, but just not at this time. By this time, the saints had been told the state militia was going to be committed to returning them to their homes, So Joseph Smith asked for 400 men to make the 1,600-mile round-trip journey to Missouri and provide military support, as well as, I suspect, keep an eye on the militia. And after all, when you show up with your own army, it tells the local population you're not to be trifled with. But to his dismay, Joseph only received approximately 200 volunteers for the grueling journey on foot and in wagon. So they set off in May 1834. Now, Mormons retell this and state that Joseph's intent was only to assist the state militia and not show up as an invading force or a conquering army. However, as we will see later, Joseph Smith had a tendency to build relatively effective little paramilitary forces at the time. And when you show up with a bunch of people with guns to do something, it sort of sends a message as well. Not to say the Mormons weren't being unfairly persecuted by the state, but I'm not sure I believe the church's story that this was all defensive, innocent helping. But hey, neither one of us were there. It was just important you knew both sides. Meanwhile, the expelled saints were still gathered, mostly in their tents and camps on the other side of the river, waiting to hear their fate. After all, at this time, they were still optimistic this expulsion was a temporary thing, that justice would prevail at higher levels, and that they would get their homes and lands back. So on June 12th, Mormon leaders Orson Hyde and Parley Pratt met with Governor Dunklin to discuss arrangements for the state militia and the Men of Zion's camp to facilitate the return of the saints to their homes in and around Independence. A few days later, they returned to the Mormon camp, which was about 10 miles outside of Independence, having almost completed their journey, with some less than pleasing news, which I will quote now from the autobiography of Parley Pratt. "We had an interview with the governor, who really acknowledged the justice of the demand, but frankly told us he dare not attempt the execution of the laws in that respect, for fear of deluging the whole country in civil war and bloodshed. He advised us to relinquish our rights in the sake of peace." Governor Dunklin had given in to local pressure, and he was not going to send the militia. The militia who, history has shown and both sides agree, were very anti-Mormon to begin with. Remember that scene from Young Guns 2?
Pick your tree, Breed.
Stop! I order you as a peace officer of Lincoln County.
Yeah, it was like that. To quote Emilio Estevez, the law had no damn intention of stopping them. The state was not going to get involved, and the Mormons were just told to find somewhere else to live. The governor's like, "It's better your homes get burned down than my home gets burned down, buddy." The Zion's Camp expedition got word of this, and promptly caught cholera and was disbanded. They rode 800 miles just to literally turn around when they were 10 miles away from their destination. To their credit, they did give some supplies to the settlers, but then they just had to turn around and go home. Again, the story of Zion's Camp, why they left, and all of the tribulation that happened during that journey will be told in a different video, as it deserves its own video. But long story short, Joseph and the Kirtland Mormons skedaddled back to Ohio, just having endured a hellish journey, only to find out it was for nothing. The saints were not getting their lands back, and in addition, they were threatened by a coalition of militias from multiple counties that they were all about to be slaughtered if they stayed. Now they had a new plan: to stay in Clay County in the Mormon camps and continue to grow their numbers until they could take back their rightful properties in Jackson County. That good old Mormon optimism. But on December 29th, 1836, Governor Lilburn Boggs announced his solution. After all, it was becoming painfully clear the Mormons weren't going to leave. Now at this point, it seemed harsh to just expel U.S. citizens officially from the state. After all, they couldn't really do that legally. The Mormons weren't an open military rebellion. But could he quarantine them somehow? As it stood them, no, there was nowhere to put them. But what if he divided Ray County into 3 different counties? Ray, Caldwell, and Davies County. And this one in the center? This will be Caldwell. And it will be given to the Mormons to do their weird Mormon things like make furniture and set up banks, where they wouldn't bother anybody else. It seemed reasonable at the time. The Mormons wanted to live amongst themselves, and everyone else wanted them gone. And just to make sure these Mormons stayed on their reservation, A 3-mile literal no man's land was designated where nobody else could settle on the northern and southern borders of Caldwell County. So now we have a patrolled no man's land, a buffer, and a whole county just for the Mormons. Like I just mentioned, historically when civic leaders have done this, it would come to be known as a reservation, or a ghetto, which is probably what they thought would happen here. However, these are Mormons we're talking about. They don't just roll over, they build Zion. And that's what they did, constructing the town of Far West in Caldwell County, free of persecution because of course it was Mormons only. After this, peace reigned in Missouri for 2 years. You see, everything was seemingly looking up for the Saints in Far West, but it wasn't so wonderful in Kirtland, Ohio, where Joseph Smith found himself in some banking trouble. Troubles we'll go into in later videos. But for our purposes here today, let's just say that when you set up an illegal bank and your own currency in Ohio, and it collapses because everyone hates you and they start buying up your banknotes, running on your bank, taking their cash out, depleting your already limited cash supply, devaluing your currency, then repeating the process when your currency is worth less and less, you can find yourself a very disliked man. So disliked, in fact, that this, not the march to Zion's camp, not being kicked from a town and losing their home, but this caused one of the biggest apostasy crises in the church's history. 30% of the church in Kirtland, Ohio left, and Joseph, the Mormon leader and prophet, also had his life and safety threatened. I can't definitively say this is why Joseph decided to move the headquarters of the Mormon church to Far West, Missouri in 1838, as he would probably say was a revelation, but it certainly was a convenient time to get the heck out of Dodge. So in 1838, Joseph moved the headquarters of the church from Kirtland, Ohio to Far West, Missouri, and moved there himself. And again, when Joseph Smith goes somewhere or does something, Mormons follow. I mean, come on, the Mormon Pope lives here now. It's Mormon HQ, right across the river from people who hated you so bad they set your houses on fire. I think you can see where this is going to end. On May 19, 1838, Joseph Smith had another revelation from God. He had been told the site where Adam and Eve settled after being exiled from the Garden of Eden, a site that would be a Mormon gathering place when Christ returns. Okay, cool. No way this can start a war. Unless that gathering site is in Daviess County. I guess someone should have alerted the governor to where all these Mormon holy sites are, because the next bit seems more tactical than just coincidence. I'm just saying, Joseph Smith has a lot of convenient revelations. Now, our Mormon friends would tell us, duh, when a problem comes up, he prays about it, and then God gives him an answer. And that's fine, I guess, but like I said before, I wish I could believe in something as hard as the Mormons believe in their religion. So Joseph Smith says that the site Adam on Diamond is in a neighboring county to his, and Mormons start moving there to create a settlement. Now, unlike Independence, Daviess County's largest town was Gallatin, and it was not a very big place at all. Soon, Mormons were settling there in such numbers they could decide votes and were engaging in a large portion of the town's economy, which of course profited the church and not so much the non-Mormon people of Daviess County. And soon, the Mormons started hearing the same grumbles from their neighbors as they had become familiar with back in Independence. So once again, we're in this place where the Mormons aren't doing anything wrong, technically. They are US citizens and they're allowed to live and open a business and practice any religion they want. But let's not overlook the feelings of the people of Missouri either. Once again, this strange religion of people from the Northeast who you perceive to be politically opposed to you declare your home their promised land and then move there in force, and in doing so, change the politics, culture, and economic harmony of the region. In addition, the people of Missouri felt like they were being very generous handing the Mormons a county of their own. Governor Boggs, sir, I regret to inform you that Daviess County, Ray County, and the surrounding areas are infested with these damn anti-slavery engines gonna rise up hippie Mormon bastards. I gave them a county and a town. Why can't they just stay on the res? Yeah, but then their Jesus guy moved there, and he said there were holy sites in the surrounding counties because Independence was the Garden of Eden, but we kicked their asses out of there, so now they want to live in the place where Adam and Eve ran to and they got their asses kicked out of there, which is in Daviess County. Well, tell them they can't. That's bullshit. He's just copying the Bible to move voters to less populated counties and form a voting bloc. Oh yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. But we really can't do anything. You can't tell Americans they can live on one side of a river and not another side, unless the other side isn't America. Not be America, you say? Okay. Whatever you do, don't join a confederacy of states to leave the Union just because these types of rules under the current government don't allow you to be completely horrific to the non-native population. You really can't do anything. The same thing that had just played out in Independence was threatening to happen again in their new home. Animosity towards the Mormons grew in the area, and having just lived through this once before and having camped for months after that, the Mormons were not willing to be pushed around so easily again, especially now that this was the headquarters of the church. So on July 4th, 1838, a Mormon by the name of Sidney Rigdon gave a speech in front of the town in front of Mormons and non-Mormons alike, saying this: "And the mob that comes on us to disturb us, it shall be between us and them a war of extermination. For we will follow them until the last drop of their blood is spilled, or else they will have to exterminate us. For we will carry the seat of war to their own houses and their own families, and one party or the other shall be utterly destroyed." Now again, it's worth mentioning that even though this sounds awesome coming from a bunch of Mormons, this mentality wasn't exactly their first resort. While I would define this statement as reactionary, it was the declaration of the Missouri-Mormon War, and the first battle of the Missouri-Mormon War would happen in the town of Gallatin in Daviess County, where Adam and Eve and a sizable Mormon population had fled. On August 6th, 1838, elections were being held in Gallatin, where a gentleman with the unfortunate name of William Penniston was running for office. Penniston was in league with a fanatically anti-Mormon justice of the peace named Adam Black, who we will meet later. Adam Black had publicly warned the Mormons to leave Daviess County previously or suffer the consequences. But now, when up for election in the county, his friend Penniston started kissing Mormon butt, because the Mormons, of course, are a strong bloc of voters now. The Saints, however, did not forget Penniston's and Black's threats from mere months before. So the Mormons got together and decided they would all go to Gallatin to vote against Penniston. Seems reasonable. A politician literally wants you dead, so you vote for the other guy. Now, there are a lot of things Penniston can do in this situation. He can say he said some messed up things about a religion he didn't quite understand, but perhaps an apology and a sincere... No, he literally set up a whiskey barrel on election day in front of the whole town, stood on it, and announced that, and I'm quoting him here, he did not consider the Mormons had any more right to vote than the damn N-words. Only he didn't say N-word. And any Mormon who attempted to vote should be killed. This is also to say that in 1838, you could stand on a whiskey barrel in front of town hall and scream the N-word in front of the whole town, and they wouldn't lock you up or get you to a doctor. They would elect you to high office. Now, of course, as they do, Mormons showed up to vote for their guy, the guy who did not want them killed. However, when Mormon families arrived, they found about 200 of the Gallatin townsfolk who were, let's say, inspired by Penniston's speech, armed with whips and clubs, who were there solely to ensure the Mormons did not vote in their election. There were some scuffles and minor injuries, but nobody was seriously wounded or killed that day. The bottom line is, though, the tactics worked, and the Mormons did not get to vote that day. Another problem with living in 1838 is you have to rely on a lot of secondhand information. This will become an even bigger problem later, so keep this in mind as we go through our story. Word spread to Joseph Smith back in Far West that not only had this scuffle happened, that a couple of Mormons were killed in it. So Joseph Smith gathered a group of Mormon men and went to the settlement of Adam on Diamond, only to find out that nobody had been killed, but there was a serious miscarriage of justice and voting rights. The man was keeping the Mormons down. So Joseph and a few of the boys went to the home of Justice of the Peace Adam Black. Remember Peniston's homeboy who happened to despise Mormons? After all, they had all these fighting men and no fight, so let's get something done, right? Included in this group of Mormon men was a gentleman named Samson Avard, or Avard. I fight with how to pronounce it. There are a few things you need to know about Samson. First, he looked like Leo DiCaprio in Django Unchained. But almost as important is that he was the closest thing Mormons had to Batman at the time. He was a vigilante Mormon who was fanatically into the church, and he did not share the mainstream Mormon population's views on nonviolence. And he was one of the leaders of a group known as the Danites, who we'll talk about later. The important thing to remember here is Samson Avard wasn't somebody that you brought along just to talk. Bringing Samson with you was like bringing a ranking mafia official just to chat. The implication being, this can go two ways. Our way or another way which ends with your head split open. The choice is yours.
What's it gonna be, Doc? Huh?
So after some hostile negotiations with the Mormons, the man with the villainous name, Alan Black, signed this statement.
I, Adam Black, a justice of the peace of Davies County, do hereby certify to the people, Colin Mormon, that he is bound to support the Constitution of this state and the United States. And he is not attached to any mob, nor will he not attach himself to any such people. And so long as they will not molest me, I will not molest them. This the 8th day of August, 1838.
The Mormons may have been silenced this time in Davies County, with the promise that it would not happen again, but Joseph and his church were already hard at work on their next acquisition. And I assure you, buying up real estate is a trend we'll see through the LDS Church all through our story in all chapters. This time in Carroll County, another neighboring county to Jackson and Caldwell. Now in this case, Joseph Smith didn't need a revelation in order to move people there. He just bought a town. A non-Mormon named Henry DeRoot literally sold the church a town named DeWitt. And this is where things got real. The citizens of DeWitt and Carroll County were having none of this. Much like the stories of Mormons being killed in Gallatin, stories about this weird Puritan religious cult of polygamists and murderers had also kind of gotten out of hand. They were so destructive and pushy, the people had to expel them from independence, and when given a county, they insisted on creating new settlements and even tried to get involved in politics. Then they made demands to a justice of the peace at nigh gunpoint. Now they weren't just founding settlements, they were buying whole towns. Was any of this fear justified? Some, but mostly no. But the point is, this was the last straw for the non-Mormons in this area in Missouri. Yet another mob was formed and did what Missouri mobs do at the time. They burned and ransacked homes, raped women, and tarred and feathered and whipped men and then took some hostages. Word reached Far West that this was happening again. And knowing that there was no help coming from the state, Joseph Smith asked the families to return to Far West in safety. But the Mormon families refused. They were tired of being run out of their homes. But the Missouri townfolk would certainly try. On December the 20th, 150 armed men rode into DeWitt and gave the Mormons 10 days to leave or face annihilation. Carroll County forces sealed off the town like a siege. Despite this, the Saints were able to get word to Governor Boggs, who dispatched the state militia under the command of General Parks, who met with the mob, then promptly turned around and went back home. Partially because the county militia itself was sympathetic to the mob. In fact, a man named Samuel Bogart from the Ray County militia was so outspoken regarding the Mormons needing to leave that General Parks dismissed him and the Ray County militia and threatened him with charges of insubordination. I mentioned Samuel Bogart because his name will come up again later. Sir, I have a letter from our man in DeWitt. Looks like the people of the county are kicking the Mormons' asses back to New West like Independence, but smaller and much less time to get out.
Wait, doesn't the church literally own the town?
Yeah, but everyone around there is all like, "F that." When the Mormons arrive somewhere, they start calling their cousins and uncles and grandparents, and everyone starts moving in with them. Look what happened to Ray and Caldwell and Davies. We had people moving out of there to get away from all that no drinking, no whores Mormon crap.
I see. We can't just let the townsfolk slaughter them, though. They control the votes in 2 counties now. Send in the militia to break up the mob.
So on October the 6th, 1838, the militia arrived and was promptly told to take a hike. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and we'll do with these dang old Mormons whatever we please. Sir, the militia literally pissed their pants and ran away.
What? Why?
Well, they showed up and they got called traitors to their own people, and they were outnumbered, and I think they probably didn't like the Mormons very much to begin with. Hey, do you ever see Young Guns 2?
What guns too?
Darn, that would have made this a lot easier to explain. Well, I guess the bottom line is the militia you sent was on the mob's side, so
they didn't even try to stop them?
Bingo. And chances are nobody will. So what are we going to do? Are you going to send an army against the settlement of U.S. citizens, or what?
Well, I'm gonna pretend it's not happening. The Mormons probably gonna die.
And that's what Boggs did. His answer was literally, this is a matter between you and the citizens, and you should just fight it out. Now, having seen that the mob could run off the militia, and frankly, the militia had no real intention of stopping the Carroll County forces, because most, if not all of them, were sympathetic to the get rid of the interlopers cause, basically, the Mormons figured out they were dead meat. The choices for the DeWitt Mormons were clear. Leave with your valuables and don't be beaten and raped. Or stay, watch all of your stuff get burned or stolen, be beaten and raped, then probably be made to leave anyway if you survive the ravaging. So the Saints in DeWitt packed up and rode back to far west. Hey, do you guys remember Samson Avard?
Fun.
The guy who went with Joseph Smith to shake down Adam Black back in Gallatin? Yeah, there's a reason I advised you to remember his name other than it being super easy to associate with badassery. Samson ran a gang. It was a gang. It was a Mormon vigilante gang called the Danites. And with this newest illegal forced expulsion under penalty of violence, the Danites had a few more members. The Order of the Danites were born of the famous Salt Sermon given by Mormon leader Sidney Rigdon. As we will talk about in later videos, apostasy was becoming more common. Naturally, the longer a religion exists, and the more difficult it is to adhere to the tenets of beliefs in a religion, the more people will leave the church. And being an early Latter-day Saint was no easy task for anyone. We've seen in just this video 1,600-mile under-equipped treks, being expelled from community after community, and we haven't even gotten to what happened in Kirtland, Ohio, or what will happen elsewhere later. Long story short, there was a growing collection of people in the church that were starting to question Joseph Smith's leadership, and there was a ironic growing concern among the Mormons about formerly Mormon families who still lived in their community after being excommunicated or leaving the church of their own will. So Sidney Rigdon made this speech back in June, where he said, "If the salt hath lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out, to be trodden under foot of men." Translated from early Mormon to our language, this meant to cast out, shun, and harass those who leave the church until they BTFO away from all of us good Mormon people. Again, the irony of this coming from someone who faced the same oppression doesn't escape me. Enter Samson Avard and the Danites. The Danites' job was to encourage ex-Mormons to get out of town. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a Mormon mafia. It's not a mafia. Mormons will tell you very clearly it was not a mafia. And coming from someone who's half Italian, I can confirm this. While the mob engages in things like employing vigilantes to use intimidation and violence to make people leave their homes, the mob did so much more than that. So I concur with the Mormons on the 200-year-old Danite debate. They were not a mafia. They were a secret society of violent enforcers. That's just part of being a mafia. I can hear Mormons watching this video now saying they weren't a secret society, they were a society with secrets, but a group of men who take a blood oath not to reveal the society's secrets under penalty of death, with secret signs and handshakes, who take an oath of allegiance to always support one another, and if one commits a crime, it is their duty to cover it up until the accused can be tried under their own secret justice system. Yeah, let's agree that it was at very least a Masonic-style society, and one that Joseph Smith knew of. He even attended some of their meetings, but historians agree he probably wasn't in on everything that they did. After all, this situation was becoming undeniably civic and political, and the concept of their leader needing to have plausible deniability was not foreign to them. Unfortunately, there just weren't enough apostates. So the Danites were now a gang of tough guys with a specific set of intimidation and soldiering skills with nothing to do. So they naturally became kind of a Mormon militia. Not an official state militia, but they were official enough to march in the 4th of July parade with the state militia, as well as many of the Danites also being members of the official militia, which is complicated. Wow. I hope these groups never come to blows. And now you know what a Danite is. Now on to what the Danites did in retaliation for the expulsion from DeWitt, land which was literally owned by the church. The way they saw it, they spent most of their lives just trying to be left alone and go to church, and no matter where they went, someone was trying to burn their homes down. So Samson and the Danites figured it was time for them to do some burning.
Come on over. We got us a fight going on that's a good bit of fun.
In mid-October, the Danites struck back, attacking the towns of Gallatin, Grindstone Fork, and Millport, ransacking and burning them to the ground. Now this made sense because Gallatin and Millport were the towns supplying the men for the mobs that were harassing the Mormons in Adamant-Diamant. And this forced the townspeople to just leave for more peaceful pastures. The attack on Gallatin was also personal, having been the location of the brawl which sparked the Missouri-Mormon War. They burned it down real good. Now let's be fair, this was not a traditional war. The Mormons weren't taking land like an invading force. But if they were, they just surprise attacked and won Daviess County. In Ray County to the south, word had reached them regarding what happened in Daviess County, and they feared they would be next. So the Missouri citizens called out the Ray County militia under the command of Samuel Bogart. Now you remember Samuel Bogart, right? The guy that hated Mormons too much back in DeWitt? He hated Mormons. He hated Mormons like slave traders hated blacks. But now Samuel got his dream job. His job was to patrol the no man's land and stop any armed Mormons crossing into Ray County. Now that was it. That's your only job, Samuel. So after a few boring days of waiting on an army of Mormons to cross the border that may never have come, Bogart decided to go on the offensive. First, he began ransacking the homes of Mormon settlers in northern Ray County, driving the Saints living there back to Caldwell to the relative safety of Far West. In response, the Saints in Far West then dispatched 2 spies to monitor the actions at the border as they hunkered down in Far West, likely knowing what was coming since they had just had this happen a couple of months ago. And it wasn't long before Bogart crossed into Caldwell County and began disarming and harassing the Mormons there on their own turf. Now while doing so, he captured 3 men, William Seeley, Addison Green, and Nathan Pinkham Jr. The militia patrol took them prisoner, bragging to everybody that they saw that they would never be seen alive again. What the militia didn't know is that William Seeley and Addison Green were 2 of the spies dispatched to monitor the border. They were noticed missing more quickly than the militia thought they would be. Now this is where history kind of tells 2 tales. If you ask your Mormon friends what happened next, they will tell you that the Saints believed a mob had captured these 3 men, not a militia. Just more townspeople vigilantes. However, I take a little bit of umbrage with that. In response, 3 formal, trained battle groups were called up and formed, and the Saints marched through the night to go and retrieve their lost spies. And another guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. which is a pretty military activity for people just going to confront a mob of angry townspeople. And around daybreak, a confrontation they would have. On the morning of October 24th, 1838, the three Mormon regiments were just clearing a hill northwest of the Ray County militia camp when they encountered sentries dispatched by the militia. After a not-so-Mormon exchange of words, the sentries fired into the Mormon ranks, wounding and later killing Patrick O'Banion, the Saints' guide. Meanwhile, Samuel Bogart and his Ray County militia were camping at the riverside, but luckily were on high alert due to receiving word from the town of Richmond in Ray County that the Mormon invasion was expected at any time. When their sentries came tumbling down the hill screaming warnings, followed by three Mormon battle groups armed with guns and sabers. The Ray County militia was initially ready. They dug in for cover behind the 4-foot riverbank and trees, leveled their rifles or muskets, and opened fire on the Saints. And to be clear, they had a serious terrain advantage on the Mormons, who formed their three battle lines on the hill in open terrain, with the rising sun at their backs silhouetting them taking fire from enemies they couldn't even see. While at long range, the militia held the advantage, killing 6 of the Mormon fighters. And this is how the battle was waged for a time. The militia stayed behind the cover of trees in the 4-foot river embankment, essentially immune to the Mormon fire. That was until one of the Mormon leaders named David Patton, who had gotten a reputation for being a total badass during the raids on Daviess County, gave the Mormon battle cry of "For God and Liberty," and charged down the hill into the Missouri militia lines, drawing his saber. Then he was shot immediately and killed because that's not a super great strategy in open field against rifle fire. But he was followed by his men, and that actually worked out. Here's the thing you need to know about the Ray County militia. They weren't professional soldiers. They did not have sabers. They had long rifles or muskets, maybe a smaller sidearm. Some of them had a machete at best. These were farmers. The Mormons had no real advantage at long range with the terrain they were fighting on, but they had one thing the militia did not: sabers. So while they were sitting ducks on the hill, when they hit the Missourians' lines, they wreaked havoc. And the Ray County militia ended up scattered in retreat in all directions. The Mormons had just won the Battle of Crooked River. Total Mormon losses, 7. Total Ray County militia losses, 1. But the militia didn't know that. They had scattered into different groups in retreat and all thought the other ones had been killed. So back in Richmond, word started getting around that the Mormon army had just decimated their militia. Rumors of up to 70 dead started spreading. Nobody really knew what the truth was at that point. Militiamen were just coming back to town saying, yeah, everyone but us got killed. The Mormons just invaded Ray County. The real issue at hand for the Saints here was, according to them, they were just defending themselves and rescuing their friends from a vigilante mob, which is totally legal. But in reality, whether they knew it or not, they had just attacked a chartered state militia, meaning they had just attacked the state. The Mormons had just declared war on Missouri. But not just Missouri. If you want to get really technical, they just declared war on the United States. Now I know our Mormon friends aren't going to like hearing that, and I think you can tell I'm more than sympathetic to your plight in Missouri. I'll go as far to say that you did not draw first blood. You were being harassed with violence and responded in kind. And that violent response was only due to the state completely ignoring what was happening and leaving you to the tender mercies of the Missourians. All of that is true, and I understand. But you cannot get around the fact that you attacked a sanctioned, chartered official state militia division with battle lines, not just some ambush in the woods, and you won and drove them from the ground. That would be like attacking a US military base to get your prisoners back today and running the army off their own installation on US soil. You can safely bet there will be repercussions for your actions. Hey, how's it going? What are you doing?
I'm doing literally anything but addressing the Mormon problem.
Oh, that sucks. I bring news of the Mormon problem.
God damn.
They have encountered the state militia and engaged them in a firefight.
Report.
All right, man, chill. Mormon losses were estimated at 7. We lost somewhere between 1 and 70 men. Probably closer to 1. Nobody really knows at this point.
Nobody knows. How is this a report if you don't even know that? So we won, right?
No.
I'm sorry. Did you say no?
Yeah, you see, we had the Mormons outnumbered and pinned down with fire, but it's 1838, and reloading is a pain in the ass for a ragtag group of untrained, non-professional military men. And the weapons they were using are notoriously inaccurate and unreliable.
So
the Mormons had swords, and they charged into our lines, and the men ran away. Yeah, they totally just scattered like scared women. Something about being a farmer who doesn't really care being charged by religious zealots with swords trying to behead them at dawn kind of spooked them.
They only killed one of our men, though? Were there at least legendary amounts of limbs lost? Something I can use to justify an extermination?
No, 1 dead and 1 wounded. Everyone just, ran. We should probably consider paying them in the future.
These little bastards have left me no choice. Execute Order 44.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. On October 27th, 1838, the state of Missouri had all the justification they needed to go right after the Mormons. In all technicalities, they had just attacked the state militia.
It's treason, then.
And Governor Boggs signed Executive Order number 44.
Execute Order
44.
The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary for the public peace.
Now the Saints were enemies of the state. And not only that, back in 1830, we didn't have the disdain for vigilantism like we do now. The citizens were wholly encouraged to get involved when it came to running these Mormons out. Or, adversely, killing them down to the last man. And with that, Boggs ordered a 2,500-man state militia to put down the Mormon insurrection and carry out the order. So how are we supposed to feel about this today? On one hand, the Mormons were being unfairly persecuted, including murder, kidnapping, extortion, rape, and straight-up Viking-style burning of their homes. They appealed to the government for protection and were told, despite being technically correct, the community hated them, so nothing they could do. Take a walk. On the other hand, the Mormons were also in the business of militia building, sacking towns, and now full-on military engagement with the United States. Something had to be done. The Mormons were more than willing to negotiate, but unfortunately for them at that time, Order 44 didn't leave a lot of gray area in the language of the plan. Exterminate is pretty specific. The way the governor and the state saw it, these Mormons f***ed around and now it was time to find out. But the state takes time to act. So before word of the order had even reached most people, an attack was being planned by a local militia as well. To try and be completely fair to them, from their perspective, it was a counterattack and reprisal for the Mormon raids on Daviess County. Little did they know they were just ahead of the game in the state Mormon War. This time, the militia wasn't going to take any chances with this play fair and rules of engagement crap. First, they met with the Saints in the settlement of Hans Mill and offered a truce, disarming the Saints as part of their negotiations. Because when they want to disarm you, it always ends well, right? On October 30th, 1838, it was a beautiful morning in Hans Mill, Missouri. It was a Mormon settlement with little more than 30 families in it. A mill, a blacksmith, not much else. It was a quiet, safe place in the wilderness to raise a family in the love and light of Jesus Christ and our Heavenly Father. A morning like any other, until word arrived that a group of men was coming. Now the men of Hans Mill sent the women and children into the surrounding forest to hide, as they awaited whatever was to come. They had very few arms left due to the fake treaty and were more or less completely helpless. What came for them was an epic volley of 1,600 bullets on the whole town in a sustained attack lasting less than an hour. The small town was sacked and burned, and those who survived and were found were executed, including 3 children. 17 Mormons were killed that day. This incident became known as the Hans Mill Massacre. On November 2nd, the Missouri Army, under the Order 44 initiative, with the Hans Mill Massacre fresh in the Saints' minds, made camp outside of Far West. Seeing the army at their doorstep, this was a threat of all-out war, something that the church was not really capable of fighting. Getting the jump on a county militia detachment is quite different from fighting a sustained war against the United States. Now, with the army camped right outside and ready to burn the town to the ground, it might be time to negotiate. Word was sent to Joseph Smith that negotiations were sought, and himself, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman White, Parley P. Pratt, and George Robinson went out to negotiate, where they were promptly arrested. So Joseph Smith and his band surrendered with the provision that the people of the town would be safe. Unfortunately for them, these men didn't become trustworthy in the last 30 seconds. So as soon as the Mormon leaders were carted off, the army raided and burned the town anyway, destroying the headquarters of the church and effectively the Mormon capital. Once again, the Saints had their homes burned. Many of their members lay dead, and now their prophet and church leaders were in chains. All because this dumbass, who taught this dumbass, refused to do anything until it resulted in all-out mini-war in their state. This could have been stopped in Jackson County if the government was willing to just say, no, you cannot kick your neighbors off land they legally own because they stick to themselves and worship differently than you. With the church leaders in chains, the Mormon capital of Far West burned, and the people once again homeless and scattered, the Mormon-Missouri War was effectively won by the state of Missouri. A valiant effort by the Mormons was made, but in the end, a town can't fight against an entire army. So how does the story of the Mormons in Missouri end? Well, Joseph Smith and his companions were taken to Liberty, where they were tried and Smith was condemned to death. However, the quick backwoods trial bordered on, if not was full-on illegal, and even Alexander Donovan, a general in the Missouri militia who was present for the trial, refused to carry out the order to execute Smith, as there were no formal charges filed, no attorneys, no real judge. It was more like the trials in Gotham under the rule of Bane. The men in charge respected the rule of law enough not to just shoot him, so Joseph Smith got lucky there. Unfortunately, that's where they sat for 5 months. In jail on charges of treason against the state, arson, murder, larceny, burglary, and robbery. Now, you don't have to be a legal scholar to see the problems here. Smith nor any of these men present committed any of these acts. And when it comes to the actions of the Danites, you would be hard-pressed to prove that he ordered that either. This was about 200 years before the RICO statute as well, so you couldn't just treat it like organized crime. So there they sat through the frigid, miserable Missouri winter in a non-heated wooden jail in the middle of nowhere. The jailers and more educated people of the town were actually getting kind of sympathetic to them. After all, you really had nothing to charge these men with. And it was more like they were being tortured now just to send a message to anyone else who wanted to join the church. So on April the 6th, 1839, Joseph Smith and his companions were taken under guard from the Liberty Jail and were going to be transported to their trial in Boone County, but they never made it. Whether the armed guards were sympathetic to them or whether they were paid by the church, for one reason or another, they allowed the Saints to make their escape. And escape they did. They rode hard. Joseph Smith and the others not only left Liberty, they left Missouri altogether. They went to a small, swampy peninsula in Illinois that had become a gathering place for the lost Saints. It was a place nobody else wanted to settle, but it was outside the reach of the Missouri state government, and there was a good reason nobody wanted to settle there. It was a fetid swamp where the mosquitoes were so thick people started getting malaria. But these are Mormons we're talking about here. They don't get sad, they don't get sick, they get to building Zion. So plans were made to drain the swamps and once again attempt to build their own society. And this town would come to be known as the town of Nauvoo, Illinois. A town that would grow to rival Chicago in size at its time. A city that Joseph Smith would become mayor of. and the city he would be killed in. But that is another episode entirely. Join me for our next episode to learn about what happened to Joseph Smith, and how and why the Mormons eventually left Illinois as well, and ended up in Utah. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more weird Mormon history with Mormon Wars.